Electronic ignitions to use or not to use. Or I should say to convert or not to convert. I get this question a lot, and I see this a lot, where Mercedes show up in our shop that have electronic ignition systems installed. So this is a pretty lengthy topic. I'm going to try to condense it down into a 5-minute video that will help all of you understand why most electronic ignition systems are actually junk. That's right, you heard me. Most of them, not all of them. So there are 3 different types of ignition systems that Mercedes used throughout their production as a car company. There was the basic point and condenser system, which some people call battery ignition. The next system was transistorized ignition, which started out using points, but eventually went to a Hall effect sensor in the distributor. The third one that we talk about on this channel is EZL-based ignition that used a crankshaft position sensor, a dedicated control unit, and a distributor. Eventually, Mercedes went to coil pack ignition, such as on the M113 and M112 engines, and of course on the later M119 engines, where the crankshaft position sensor directed ignition impulses through the engine control unit. So this is mostly, this topic covers cars that have battery ignition with points and early transistorized ignition models. It does not cover anything after 1977, which was when they finally switched the M110 engine over to transistorized ignition with a Hall effect sensor, and in 1979 or 80, when the last M115 engine cars were supplied without ignition points. So anything newer than that is not going to be covered. But let's see if we can make this a simple topic. Now, a lot of people take the points out and replace them with a Hall effect sensor type ignition that goes right in here, where the points used to go. It is usually made by Crane or Pertronics, and it basically makes all of the calculations instead of the points and routes them directly to the ignition coil, telling the ignition coil where to fire off, often with a control unit attached, but not always. So Crane systems used an auxiliary box. Pertronics no longer uses an auxiliary box, but they do have their own resistor and coil that they supply. Now, why don't I like electronic ignitions? Well, there are a few reasons. The first one is that you can't put a Pertronics ignition system in a worn-out distributor, a distributor with problems, and expect it to work right. You're not actually fixing anything. You're just putting in something you don't have to adjust. Now, people say that the electronic systems are headache-free, but we have seen more electronic ignition system failures than we have out-and-out point and condenser failures. Now, why is this? Well, the Pertronics unit and the Crane unit and the Hot Spark unit and all of those units are one-size-fits-all units. You put them in the distributor. They're really not set up specifically for the Mercedes ignition curve. And in fact, some of them do not allow maximum advance, and some of them do not allow maximum retard, meaning that the power that you get out of your original distributor with its basic point set and its advanced curves and all of that stuff is somewhat curtailed by the electronic ignition system. I remember a story that my friend Bud Cloniger told me about a 280SL that had electronic ignition in it from Pertronics, where the car would get driven for 30 or 40 miles and then it would start to act really funny and eventually die. And this is an electronic ignition system problem. The control unit was just overheating, the little control unit in the distributor, and it would just fail. We also had a 300 SEL 6.3 that a friend of mine owned, which we affectionately named Chocolate and Vanilla. So I think the owner of this car might actually be watching, and he probably remembers the first test drive where the thing just would not go over 75 miles an hour. Now imagine that, a 6.3 that would not go over 75 miles an hour. It's just abysmal. So as soon as I put a distributor in it that had not been modified, and I went back to the dual point ignition, which in the 6.3 is actually very reliable and will put up with a lot of crap, will take a lot of abuse and a lot of neglect, that sucker ran like there was no tomorrow. I mean, it would just sit there and accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. And of course, with the 6.3, people think that they're accomplishing something by putting an electronic unit in. Wrong. The 6.3 really needs those dual points so that it can get maximum ignition advance and distribute an extremely strong hot spark to the engine. The other nice thing about having the dual point ignition in the 6.3 and also the M189 engines is redundancy. If you lose one set of points, the car will still run. So why do people put these freaking electronic ignition systems in if they're so bad? Well, because of misconceptions. Now, I remember I crashed a tech session for a certain MBCA technical director a few years ago at a StarTech event. And even though he was trying to market his crane products to us, or maybe he was selling Pertronics then, acting like they were so much better, I calmly sat down and explained to him that I own 3 cars that have ignition points and transistorized ignition, which some people really don't like. And every single one of the cars has been flawlessly reliable. I mean, in my 280 SE35, 45, or 280 SL, I have never had a problem with the ignition controllers, ever, period. They've just been great. I mean, the cars have driven through water before and everything, and they still ran good. You know, the transistorized system was awesome, and it still is pretty awesome. The problem is other issues, always, right? So if you have a 280 SL or a 230 SL with battery ignition, or any Mercedes with battery ignition, a major source of headaches is the condenser. People will not replace the freaking condensers in these cars. They just don't. I'll see all these cars, oh, it dies and quits, and it has a 30-year-old condenser on it. Hint, if you're going to put a condenser on one of these cars, buy a condenser for a 230 SL and buy it from Mercedes. Yes, it is $94. No, it will not leave you stranded. The $12 generic Bosch Turkey condensers, the ones made in Turkey, are junk. Don't use them. Even if Mercedes sells you one, it is junk. The only condenser that I really trust is the gold one that they supply that is made in Germany. So it's got to be anodized gold. If you see anodized gold, that is the ticket. That's a good condenser. If you see anodized silver with a, you know, that feels kind of lightweight and chintzy, garbage. Not good. So Tom, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but most of the condensers Mercedes are selling are made in Turkey, except for the one for the 230 SL, which is awesome. Now, another thing is lack of ignition system maintenance. You have to adjust your points and make sure they're lubricated. If they're adjusted and lubricated, they're super reliable. Now, people say, Pierre, what if I wanted a set it and forget it system? Well, then I guess you should buy a set it and forget it car, like a 560 SL or a 380 SL. Now, it is possible, if you have a 3.5 or a 4.5, to upgrade to a Hall effect sensor distributor, but that's a story for another day. You can put the ignition system, though, from a 70, from a 75 or 76 model year 450 SL in there. As long as you keep the base distributor, you can change the ignition system and you can put the later transistorized control in it. But you know, there's still nothing wrong with any of these units. They're all great technology. So what would you rather have? Something that costs billions of dollars to engineer in Germany, or something that is made in China by a bunch of people that have never driven a Mercedes in their life and are really not depending on the car for reliability when they're using it? I think I know what I like, and it has worked for me so far. Original equipment, always best. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please like it. Please share this with your friends who love Mercedes as well. Please consider checking out our Patreon page. We love bringing you amazing content. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love to have you. And as a final note, somebody left in one of the comments that they thought that I was arrogant. I'm not. I'm actually very approachable, and I love reading people's comments. And if you need to contact me because of a Mercedes-related issue, then I'm always happy to help you, and I will always get back to your email or phone call within 2 days or less. Anyway, enjoy driving your Mercedes Benz, and remember, original is always best.